I'm Trista Kersidlow, and I am, much to the chagrin and embarrassment of my parents, an attorney. This makes me their least educated child. I can't prescribe medication. I only write wills for them, that's it. Yeah, kind of the worthless child. But I let you know that because I'm not licensed in the state of Idaho. So when we talk about law today, I'm not providing you with legal guidance. We are about 70 close personal friends that happen to be having a conversation about the law. Antitrust is fascinating, and it's one of the areas when we look at real estate law where we have had an increase in the number of our licensees who are being prosecuted, which is one of the reasons it's so important that we look at it today, especially under the current administration. So I want to start with the Sherman Act, which was adopted in 1890, and then it's followed by the Clayton Act, which comes along in 1914. So for those of you who instruct on this, what happened between 1890 and 1914? All right, how many of you remember the movie Titanic? Came out 25 years ago. Won a ton of Oscars this time of year. All right, so in the movie Titanic, you have the party that's happening down in steerage, right? Where there's dancing and drinking and good stuff's happening. And then you have a conversation up above in the first class men's lounge. And someone's talking about, well, that didn't work for Rockefeller. Do you remember that part? The boring guys? They were talking about antitrust. More importantly, they were talking about the case U.S. versus Standard Oil. And U.S. versus Standard Oil is when Standard Oil got broken up, followed by the American Tobacco Company breakup. Well, what happens is after we have the Sherman Act adopted in 1890, we have U.S. versus Standard Oil comes along, and we have a government trend towards increasing the number of antitrust cases that we have, which means the adoption of the Clayton Act, and then the creation of the Federal Trade Commission Act and the Federal Trade Commission. Now, in 2021, President Biden issues Executive Order 14036, and it's his executive order on promoting competition in the American economy. And in his executive order, he directs the Federal Trade Commission to increase their oversight in the real estate arena, especially involving tying arrangements. So we have a direct request from the president to our Federal Trade Commission to increase the prosecution of antitrust violations in real estate. So the Sherman Act, as it was originally adopted in 1890, says every contract combination in the form of trust or otherwise, or conspiracy in restraint of trade or commerce among the several states or with foreign nations is declared to be illegal. That's some hot stuff right there, right? How many of you read that and you're like, that makes perfect sense? I understand. Trista, you can get on the plane. I'm ready to teach it. It makes zero sense when you look at it from a real estate perspective, right? Because you are not foreign nations, right? Nor are you, several states. So how does it apply to you? How do we see the Sherman Act in play? What does a violation look like? So how many of you start all antitrust conversations with U.S. versus Foley? Just you and me. U.S. versus Foley's the seminal case of antitrust in real estate. And so I want to play out a little bit what a U.S. versus Foley, kind of that case, what it would look like if it happens today. So it's not exactly U.S. versus Foley. And so we're going to start with Loretta. All right, Loretta, you for this instance are going to be the broker owner of the second largest real estate brokerage in Idaho. Congratulations. Krista, you are going to be the broker owner of the largest real estate brokerage in Idaho. Congratulations. Josh, you own a boutique brokerage. All right, you only represent sellers of properties that have farms that grow potatoes, and they have to have an excess value, fair market value, of $7 million. You don't work with buyers, and you don't work with sellers selling less than $7 million, all right? But Josh, you have a daughter. all right? And your daughter has just gotten her real estate license, and she has come to you and she has said, Dad, I want to join the brokerage, but I don't want to sell potato farms. I don't feel it. It's not my vibe. I want to work with everyone, buyers, sellers, everything. I don't want to work in a boutique brokerage.
You're fired.
We do not fire family in real estate.
All right.
You
You're
cannot fire family. All right. Barb, you are the broker owner of the third largest real estate brokerage in Idaho.
Sure.
Congratulations. All right. So it is the holiday season, and Krista decides that she is going to have a holiday party. And she is going to invite Loretta and Josh and Barb and some of the agents from their offices, and they're all going to come to her country club, because Krista, you look like a country club type of gal.
For a week.
And dinner's going to be served at 6. We're going to have an open bar happy hour, and because y'all are realtors, open bar happy hour, if dinner's at 6, starts at about 2:30. So all of those folks show up, okay? And you have a beautiful dinner. And after everyone has eaten, but before the dessert course comes out, Krista stands up and she says, there are 2 things wrong with real estate today. 1, I am not making enough money. And 2, these new agents, they cannot do the math. So to solve this problem of their lack of education and me not making enough money, I'm raising my commission rates to 10%, because anyone can figure 10% of anything. It is literally the first 2 numbers. And then Krista looks at her competitors, looks at the folks sitting at the table and says, I don't care what the rest of y'all do. And then you sit down. All right. Krista goes back to her office on Monday and she says, all right, y'all, 10%. All of our listings going forward, 10%. Any listing that expires and we're going to renegotiate the contract, come to me and we'll discuss where we're going to be between where we are now and our 10% goal. All right, Loretta, as soon as you leave the dinner, you go back and you start writing the letter to your agent saying, hey, y'all, we're going to 10%. We're going to raise our commission. Josh, you sit through the entire dinner and the dessert because it's free food and beer and booze. And we have met. I can't believe you don't remember me, Josh. So he goes home from that dinner and sees his daughter and says, honey, I think you were right. I can see that we need to be a full service brokerage. I think we're going to see some changes in the market. Full service we are. And he begins the process of going from a boutique brokerage specializing in potato farms with an excess of $7 million to all types of transactions. Barb, as soon as Krista sits down after she has said, I don't care what the rest of y'all do, Barb stands up. And she grabs every unopened bottle of champagne off of the tables and leaves. Unopened, so we have no problems with our whole, carry and open. You're good. Barb then goes back to her brokerage and she says to her agents, y'all, we're going to see some changes in the real estate market. We're going to stay at the percentage rate we are now on commissions. We're going to stay solid, but in 6 months, we're going to start inching up. And every 6 months, we're going to do a little bit of an increase until we get to our goal, right? So 6 months, we're going to stay at where we are, and then we're going to start to see an increase. So those are the behaviors of our brokers that were at that dinner. So who's in trouble? All right, so let's look at the elements of a violation, right? If I have violated the antitrust laws, especially Sherman, what's it look like? What does a prosecutor need to prove? We start with 1. We have a charged conspiracy. It was knowingly formed and was in existence at or about the time alleged. I'm bringing suit now, alleging that this has happened. 2, the defendant, my 4, knowingly joined the charged conspiracy or intended to agree. The charged conspiracy either substantially affected interstate or foreign commerce or occurred within the flow of commerce, and then I have a statute of limitations of about 5 years. So let's break down those top three. All right. So when we look at the charged conspiracy knowingly formed or was in existence, how do we knowingly form a conspiracy? It starts with what we call an invitation to conspire. So my invitation to conspire comes from Krista, right? Because she has all of the competitors in the room. She stands up and she says, this is what I'm going to do. I'm raising commission rates to 10%. Now she follows that by saying, I don't care what the rest of y'all do. Does that cleanse her statement? Is it no longer an invitation to conspire, or is it just a statement that she is changing her business model? What do you think? Can you cleanse a statement? I call it the Seinfeld rule. I can say whatever I want, no matter how offensive it is, as long as I follow it up with, not that there is anything wrong with that. Can I cleanse my statement if it's an antitrust invitation? No. Once I have made the invitation, it is out there. So I have an invitation to conspire. Now, when we look at knowingly formed, we look at your behaviors. Did we have an invitation to conspire, and was it followed by behavior? So did we have a change in behavior as a result of our invitation? Our three people all took some type of action, right? But Josh, he didn't increase his commission rates, right? Did he participate? What do you think? Do we have a price fixing issue? No. So what did he do to land at my table where I'm prosecuting? He stayed. And so what does that staying indicate to a prosecutor? We have silent agreement, right? So our big three violations, and this is where we have our per se conversation. So per se violations, I don't have to prove that the agreement was successful. I don't have to prove that everybody actually increased commission rates. I don't have to prove that if it's a per se case, which price fixing is. Just that we had that intention to create, and that we had follow through, and that Josh didn't leave the room. Boozer. In a per se case, I don't have to prove loss or harm as a result of the agreement. I don't have to be able to demonstrate that members of the community were harmed, that customers or consumers were harmed. And then I also don't have to prove that the conduct was unreasonable or that it lacked economic jurisdiction if I'm a per se case. So our big three are per se violations: price fixing, bid rigging, and market allocation. So when we look at US versus Foley, we're talking price fixing. So what's bid rigging? Our most recent bid rigging case that came out of Kentucky, it was our two defendants just pled guilty in December of last year, so we're waiting for sentencing. We have two real estate licensees. They go to an auction, and someone at the auction approaches them and says, here's the deal. If you will not bid, I will pay you $40,000. Because the person that wants to purchase the farmland is looking at, if I just pay everybody 40 grand to not bid, then I will end up paying less than if I had a competitive bid price war over what the property is going to be. That's bid rigging. Do we see bid rigging frequently? What's kind of the genesis of bid rigging? Because it has such a great start. It was in the Depression where we saw bid rigging, where someone would lose a property, and then at the foreclosure auction, everybody would agree, we're just not going to bid, and we're going to allow the original owner of the property to buy it at the foreclosure auction for pennies. Yes? Our third per se violation is market allocation. So the market allocation where Loretta tells Garrett, you're a West Side realtor. I'm an East Side realtor. And we agree, Garrett, that if you have an agent, if you have a potential buyer who wants to buy on that other side of town, you don't work with them. That's our market allocation. When we look at price fixing, which is what happens in US versus Foley, it's where we have an agreement to charge the same price, or we're all going to raise prices together. We're going to add fees or surcharges, eliminate discounts or have uniform discounts, establish minimum prices, establish a standard pricing formula, and to coordinate and not compete on other commercial terms. When we look at price fixing, all of those fall in there. Now, so who's going to the big house? When we look at these four, so Krista makes the invitation to conspire and has everyone increase their commission rates to 10% within her brokerage. Is she going to the big house? Yes. What about Loretta?
Oh, she's gone. She should have been packing.
Okay. What about Josh? Now remember, Josh did not increase his commission rates, right? But he stayed throughout. What about Barb?
I just drank it.
Barb steals the booze, right? So she doesn't commit the Josh problem of staying during the conversation that follows the invitation to conspire. She's not there. Then she goes back to the brokerage, and what does she do within her brokerage?
Intent.
She states that they are going to increase commission rates, right? We're going to start in 6 months having a slow increase. We're not jumping to 10%. Barb, why did you raise your commission rates? Everybody else is doing it, right? This leads to the conversations that some agents have with their sellers where they say, this is the commission rate, it's standard.
Ooh,
Is that language we use? Because when people start saying everyone is charging this or it is standard, what is the appearance? We have all agreed. So when we look at kind of that type of behavior, that's where we have the issue, right? She's going to change in the future to follow the going trend. We need to be able to demonstrate, why did we make the change in our business model? And then we want to be able to document why that change was made. Now in US versus Foley, nobody actually went to prison. They just paid huge fines. And so I, of course, am reading why they didn't go to prison. It was so great. You had one guy with a heart condition. And then you had folks that argued that they wouldn't be able to make the money to pay the fine if they were in prison. That's phenomenal. I love it. When we look at who's in trouble, I want you to keep in mind that violating federal law frequently leads to losing your license, right? Your real estate license. And if you lose your license, it's really hard to get into another industry that requires the license because you have to disclose that you have lost your license in a previous career choice. We start with the charged conspiracy, and when we look at that charged conspiracy, it's that agreement that our four had. Now, it's an understanding, a meeting of the minds between at least two competitors, and their purpose is to restrain trade. Were my four at the dinner who all agreed in some manner, or my three who all agreed to increase their commission rates, are they involved in that conspiracy? Yes, they all took steps to increase their commission rates to meet what was discussed. But then we've got Josh, and Josh falls within the agreement. The agreement is what constitutes the offense. An overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy is not needed. So when we look at that agreement, this is when someone might say, you know, Garrett is a pain in the rear. You know how we should take care of Garrett? We're just gonna stop working with Garrett. And then Kent is gonna nod and he's gonna say, you are absolutely right, Trista, that's what we should do. Now, Kent might be saying that just because he doesn't want to offend me, or maybe he's hitting on me, I'm really not sure. But when he responds in that manner, or when he does the and nods, then we have, he is part of that agreement, right? So when we look at the defendant knowingly joined the charged conspiracy, or they intended to agree, it's not just mere knowledge of the conspiracy. That's not what needs to be necessary. Instead, it's that you cannot demonstrate that actions you took following were not due to the conversation that followed the invitation to conspire. Does that make sense? How many of you look at this and you're like, but all of them are selling real estate in Idaho, so we're not involved in interstate commerce? How many of you are like, yeah? No. Because how many of you advertise across state lines? Meaning you have a website. You're involved in the flow of interstate commerce. How many of you have ever worked with a relocation service? Flow of interstate commerce. How many of you work with a client who's moving out of state? Flow of interstate commerce. Anybody moving in state and you're working with them? Flow of interstate commerce. Any of you taking money coming from a federal program? Flow of interstate commerce. So when we look at the way the Sherman Antitrust Act, at first when we just read that language that it has to be among several states or foreign nations, we say, yeah, not us, but absolutely it involves any time that we are trying to restrain trade. So the reason I call this Miss Americas is when you watch, how many of you watch the Miss America pageant? Exactly. Is it Kareen? So Kareen's like, I have watched Miss Congeniality, and Miss Congeniality, there is no better example of a Miss America than that which existed in Miss Congeniality, where you have folks that give an answer to a question, and it has absolutely nothing to do with the question, but they have memorized it in advance, and it's delivered with a huge smile. When we look at the Miss America, this is, I have heard an invitation to conspire, I am getting out of the conversation. So I had a woman once in one of the first classes I ever taught, and she's like, Trista, I've got a Miss America. And she stood up, and she's, Josh, what you are proposing is a violation of the federal law, and you should be in prison. And I really look forward to working with your clients while you're there. And I was like, she had the snaps and everything. I'm like, wow, that's a lot to take in. And I kept thinking, how awkward is that gonna be when I have told Josh, you belong in prison, you felon, and then I have to call him the next day and say, ooh, I've got a doozy of an offer headed towards you. Working with him is gonna be tough because I've called him out and told him that you were just a horrible human, right? Josh not doing well in prison, the colored socks. An issue. So the Miss America is, how do I extricate myself in a way where I can still call you in the morning and tell you I have an offer or a deal we need to work on. It's going to be complicated, but I have extricated myself so that nobody can allege that I've been a part of this. So when I was in law school, I always say that someone stole the booze because my law school professor was like, here's what you tell your clients. Nobody remembers who leaves the party at the end. We all remember who's there at the beginning of the party. Nobody remembers who's there at the end of a party. So if we have a conversation at the party that's antitrust, leave in a way that everyone will remember. And everyone will remember if you take their alcohol.
Oh, yeah.
So steal their booze, spill your wine, get in a fight with someone, but flip a table, but leave in a manner that everyone remembers you left. So you can call them out and say, hey, that sounds like an antitrust violation, where this is the, I'm not comfortable continuing this conversation. I'm concerned it may be an antitrust violation. Then we have the, I'm leaving. Before this discussion goes any further. Everyone remembers that you have left. And then my favorite, I have very sensitive skin. The prison uses cheap soap. It is not gonna work out for me, I'm leaving. When Al Gore gave us the internet, he didn't give directions on how we should use it, right? It didn't come with any type of manual on what we need to do. And where we see violations increasing among agents is online behaviors. Now, online behaviors change the game because we don't have someone sitting at a table where they can flip it and leave and everyone remembers, right? We have a change in the dynamics because instead of talking about physical rears in the room, we have metadata demonstrating maybe somebody read something and then as a result changed their action. So I want us to take a look at this. Now, this article's a little old, and I didn't actually read the article. I was just there for the comments that followed the article. It was when Zillow entered the real estate brokerage business. And the comments are phenomenal. You've got someone who is saying how dirty and low can slimy Zillow go, use our MLS listings to make, I think they meant money but can't spell, and the nerve to compete against, I think they mean us, and the dog's taking the scrapes. I don't understand that as a phrase in general. And then Coldwell Berkshire, which last time I checked, not actually a brokerage, but you know, it's good. Lawsuit, and then they use the magic word boycott Zillow. And as we read the comments throughout this article, it all discusses that NAR should take total control of this situation and prohibit realtors from working with Zillow or any other company that is trying to take over our profession. NAR should draw the line and stop this. Can NAR do that? No, because if NAR were to say, in order to be a member, you can't work with this company, what is that?
Antitrust.
It's a boycott, right? We're going to use our market share to negatively impact a company. It's a boycott. The interesting thing is the response from one person, and that's Chip Allswede, and at the time he was the chief executive for the Beverly Hills Association of Realtors, and he says, neither the association nor the MLS can decide to not feed to any one company. For an organization to do so would violate U.S. antitrust laws. Individual agents or brokers, however, are free to do whatever they want. He is basically quoting the Federal Trade Commission's website. And an agent responds and says, I don't agree. That's amazing. Now, from an antitrust conspiracy perspective, this is a tough one, right? Because metadata will show that I was all over these comments, right? Anyone from the Department of Justice is going to be able to look at this website, look at the metadata behind it on who read it, and they're going to see my IP address connected, right? So I'm sitting at the table. I'm Josh, right? I might not. Kent's like, you just use your neighbors.
For one of the agents in the office.
There is a whole conversation we need to have about crime television shows and you, Kent. That's not how it works. I know. All right. So they'll be able to demonstrate that I was there, right? So I haven't been able to flip the table. They can show that I read this invitation to conspire. So instead, what are they going to be looking at? So there was a case that happened out of the South this year, and you had a group, a Facebook group. It had brokers, some top producing agents, and there was an agent who had had problems with a particular builder and was very frustrated with certain behaviors of the builder. And so the Facebook group, then there was like a call to arms within the Facebook group. We will just quit showing any listings, anything in the development where this builder is building. We're done with them. Okay. Agents, what do you do, right? Agents and brokers, you're in this Facebook group, it is popped up, metadata is going to show that you read it. You might be me with your popcorn just laughing your head off going, somebody needs to go to prison for this one. How do I demonstrate that I didn't give my silent agreement, because we're talking about a per se violation potentially, right?
That's the house I'd sell them on higher.
Her response is, I'm going to show it. I'm going to show that property just to prove that I am not part of the conspiracy. So did the conspiracy or the invitation to conspire actually change the way you do business? Because now you are now you're, right? You're my 13-year-old. I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to do exactly the opposite. No. So when we look at boycotts, boycotts are not necessarily a per se violation unless it was done with intent to harm the boycotted party. So in that Facebook group, was there intent to harm the builder? So it's a per se violation. So it alleviates some of the responsibility of the DOJ and what they have to prove, right? So how do we flip a table, steal the booze online? What do you do? One, you can comment, you can Chip Allswede it, you can say, This is an illegal conversation. I will not be participating any longer, and I'm gonna leave the group, right? I am done. Number two, you can leave the group, unfriend, whatever you need to do. You can also go onto the platform itself and look at the terms of use and see within the terms of use for that social media platform or for that website, does it say that it's against community standards to make an illegal proposition? And if it is, I'm gonna report it. And then I'm gonna step away and just watch what happens. And then you're going to begin the process and you're going to document, it did not change my behavior, right? I saw this, but it didn't change the way that I did my business practice or my business model. Now, Josh, you're a broker. Let's say you have 12 agents. You have a horrible experience with a builder. Can Josh tell his 12 agents, we don't deal with that builder anymore? Can Josh tell his 12 agents, we're gonna let our clients know we have had a negative experience with that builder, and then our client's going to direct us? Within a brokerage, you can make that determination, right? Your client can direct you, but you cannot agree to join with others. Does that make sense? Okay. So tying arrangements. Now, when we look at tying arrangements, this is what was called out in Biden's executive order. So let's look at the case scenario, and then we're gonna apply the elements of a tying arrangement. We have to have two distinct products or services. Do we have them? To buy the property, you have to agree that you will sell it later. Those are two distinct services, two distinct products. A conditional sale, you can't have one without the other. You can't purchase this property unless you have agreed in writing that you will list it with us when you sell. Okay? Market power in the tying product. Does Evans have market power? If the only way that you can move into that subdivision is to work with them, do they have power? Absolutely. A substantial impact in terms of sales in the market for the tied product? Yes. And then the Ninth Circuit, which includes Idaho, has an additional requirement that plaintiffs need to prove the tying seller has some direct economic interest in the sales of the tied product. Okay. So if my tied product is, I'm going to work with you and you're going to buy this property, and then in the future you have to list it with me, do I have a financial interest in my listing? Yes. So even in the Ninth Circuit, we meet those criteria. So we have that problem, which is where we get to Biden's executive order. And so he says, to address persistent and recurrent practices that inhibit competition, the chair of the Federal Trade Commission, whose name is Lena Khan, in the chair's discretion, is also encouraged to consider working with the rest of the commission to exercise the FTC's statutory rule-making authority as appropriate and consistent with applicable law in areas such as unfair tying practices or exclusionary practices in the brokerage or listing of real estate. What Biden is saying is he's directing his commission and saying, you will look at our three big triads when it comes to antitrust and real estate, and you are going to use your statutory authority to directly address the tying arrangements and exclusionary practices that exist. Now, how many of you just follow the FTC for fun? It is hot stuff over there in FTC world. Okay, so Lena gets appointed, and she's only 34 years old, and she's the chair of the FTC. She went to Yale. While she was at Yale, she wrote an article for her law journal. Any of the attorneys in the room members of law journal? Okay, I was on Law Journal, and you get to write these articles. And so hopefully they're published, and Lena's was, and it was very, very aggressive in her statement that Amazon's got issues in the world of antitrust. And so now she's chair of the FTC, and both Amazon and Meta, Facebook, Instagram, they have all asked for her to recuse herself from any type of investigation into them, and it just became a hot mess, and she didn't recuse herself, and so the one Republican sitting on the commission resigns. Nobody pays attention to this? So there are 5 members of the commission. No more than 3 can be a member of one political party. You're appointed for 7 years. So we have only got one Republican on there, because we've also got an empty seat because Biden hasn't appointed that. Okay, so our one Republican, she steps back and she says, I disagree with my chair sitting in on investigations of Amazon when she has been so aggressive in the past and stated her opinion. And so she resigns, and then we have like a Taylor Swift lyric, diss track response from our FTC chair who says, I disagree with everything that this former member has done professionally, but I wish her the best in her future endeavors. That is good stuff. Krista's so smart. She's like, that's the T in the FTC. So what that kind of puts into perspective where our FTC is at, right? So we've got someone who has historically written their papers, their scholarly journals, stating we need to be much more aggressive in our prosecution of antitrust. And then we have our president who has said, in particular, we need to be looking at tying arrangements and exclusionary behavior in real estate. I am headed to the airport. I will hand it over.